Cold front hits and everybody says downsize and slow down. That works sometimes, but it can also be the worst move you can make. I'll give you 3 fixes that match how bass actually shift after a front, plus a bonus tip that turns a cold front into a positive. Cold fronts are part of bass fishing, especially in the spring, and it can make bites tough, but it's more of an adjustment than a death sentence to the bite. So let me walk you through it. I guided for over 10 years, had guide customers that want to catch fish every single day, didn't care if you caught them the day before. It did change it up, and I got to watch that day after day how the fish adjusted. I'll walk you through the fish that stay put, what they do differently, the ones that move, where they move into, the baits, how do you change how you work them and change different baits, and then finally I'll hit a bonus tip at the end. Cold fronts are actually a positive. They make fish bite in certain situations, so that's what I really look for. Now, I'll dive into the 3 tips in the bonus quickly here, but before we start, let's talk about the mindset and talk about what a front is actually, when it slows down, when it actually gets better. Now, I think if you were an alien that came down to Earth and you saw humans and you watched them on a sunny day, sun's beating down, and then you came back the next day and watched humans on a rainy, cool day, what would you think? It's kind of like if you were fishing. On that sunny, hot day, you'd probably see a lot of people outside having a picnic. Maybe they're eating ice cream, drinking a cold soda, something like that. Now, if they came back the next day and they looked around the ice cream stand, if they went to a park and outdoor patios at restaurants, would they find anybody? Would they see anybody eating that ice cream or drinking cold sodas? Maybe a couple, but not too many. What's going to happen is they're probably going to be inside. They're probably eating warm mashed potatoes or soup, and they're just not sitting out in that rain. And that's kind of what we do when it's bass fishing. They have to eat every day just like we do. But we're not going to sit out in a pouring rain, and we're not going to eat cold ice cream on a cold day. It adjusts. And that's what we're going to talk about with cold fronts and how the fish just adjust. They're still going to eat. It's a little bit different though. So let's talk about the fronts themselves as well. Now, a cold front, everybody knows when a front comes in, the barometer drops. A lot of times they eat like crazy. And if it's a true cold front, a lot of times that means like a storm's going to come through. So right before the thunder and lightning hits, right before it turns from warm to maybe even snowing, if you're really far north or something, there's that window. You're going to get an hour to maybe like 4 hours where they really bite really good. You're catching a lot of fish. That's prefrontal, and as the front passes. Now, the day after the front, it'll get colder, and a lot of times the wind shifts, so it'll be like a south wind or a west wind. All of a sudden, after the front comes, it's going to turn around and blow from the north. There's going to be a wind change. Now, the day after the front, the fix number 1, that's not even on the list, but that's not post-frontal to me. That's not after the cold front. They bite like crazy. As long as that wind's still blowing, especially if there's still clouds and it's drizzly and stuff, you need to get off the couch and just go. That's not post-frontal. If you're not catching them, you're just not in the right spots. They're typically biting those days. That gets a bad rap. When they stop eating, or at least it changes a lot, to me, that's the second day after the front. So let's keep in mind here that fish are affected not by wind as much, and especially not air temperature. It's the water temperature that changes. And it's not just them, but it's their, the prey that they prey on, and also it'll affect the color of the water. So think about that big storm comes through. Right after the front, the water temperature is still the same. The air temperature, boom, it just plummets. It goes down. But it's going to take like 24 hours until the water temperature actually really starts getting cold. You get the next day, and then that really cold night. That's going to impact the water temperature. That's why the second day after the front a lot of time changes. The wind starts to stop then too, so it gets flat calm. That's not biting conditions. You usually get sunny and slick. And then the other thing, a lot of times you get that big rain. Well, then you get either cold rain running in. A lot of times it's like cold mud coming in. It's just it dirties up areas. So sometimes it's not even the fact that, the water temperature changed. It's all of a sudden turned muddy. So a lot of things happen, but they take a little bit of time to work into the system. So when the front's passing, good. Day after the front, don't blame the cold front. They're probably still biting. 2 days after the cold front, when it's sunny, slick, the water turns muddy suddenly, stuff like that. That's post-frontal. That's when you can blame the cold front, and that's what we're going to dive into and how to fix it. So fix number one is make small adjustments, not big ones. And what am I talking about here? Well, a lot of fish don't really move very much. Two things we're talking about. One, we're talking about the spring where the spawn's coming up. That's when the cold fronts, everybody really worries about them. Summer, they're not as impactful. The fall, a cold front cooling down, a lot of times it helps the bite. But the spring, that's where we're all like, man, I had 5 days of 70-degree weather, my fishing trip's on Saturday, and now it's 30, and I can't find the fish. Well, those fish that are going to spawn in a week or two, or even like a month or two, they have spawn. That's a priority. They're not, if they're in the backs of creeks or on spawning flats, grass pockets and areas with a bunch of laydowns and stuff, they're not going to, the day that the water temperature drops a couple degrees, swim a mile back out to the main lake and then 2 days later come back in. And then a cold front's coming through about every 3 to 7 days. And sometimes these crazy springs we get now, it's like every other day. Those fish are not going in and out every single day. Once it starts to get closer to the spawn, say if you live up north, they spawn May and June. We're talking like March and April. Down south where I'm at, if they spawn in March and April, those fish, by the time it's already January and February, they're starting to think about, I want to get to the back of that creek. So they're starting to dig their heels in. They're not going to move that far. The other thing is, even on lakes that a lot of fish live offshore, deep, clear ones, there'll be a certain population of fish. They're resident fish. They live in the backs of creeks and in shallow areas around boat docks, around laydowns, drop-offs and rock piles, stuff like that. Those fish, they never leave the back of the creek. So a lot of fish that you were catching before are the ones you're chasing after. Those fish, I don't care if a cold front comes or whatever, they might not chase a bait as far. They might not be as aggressive. They might not even leave their little area for a while and hunker down, especially if it's really muddy or something, but they're still going to try to eat, and they're not going to abandon those areas. So starting with location, those fish, they're not going to move far. You just have to adjust how you fish for them. So let's talk about these small adjustments then. How do they relate to cover for starters? A lot of them, we love those prefrontal days right before the storm comes. I can throw a chatterbait or a crankbait and spinnerbait, all those moving baits, chunk and wind, and those fish are just kind of roaming and they're chasing. I don't have to make the perfect cast. That fish is either aggressive and going to go run it down, or they're just kind of roaming around. They may be near a dock, but they're not way up underneath it. Well, after a front, sure, the temperature is dropping, but a lot of times the sun comes out, right? So instead of roaming, the sun is going to put them a lot closer to the cover a lot of times. So if it's a lay down tree, instead of being 10 feet off to the side, well, they're just going to be right in the middle of it. And you may still be able to catch that fish, but you're going to have to put it right into the heart of that lay down and get it with a jig or something, or a Texas rig down to the bottom of it, versus before I could throw that spinnerbait, and even if I made a bad cast and threw it off to the side, well, they're roaming and coming out to get it. And then another thing, a lot of times when it's more overcast, that may put them on the bottom more. And when it's sunny, a lot of times they suspend. So if you're throwing a jig or a crankbait or a Texas rig and I'm dragging it along the bottom and I'm catching fish when it's more overcast, whether it's on just a rocky bottom or a drop, something like that, that bite might go away too. So that whole going slow, low and slow, downsize, go with a bottom dragging bait, a lot of times those fish aren't there anymore. If this is a dock pole or something, when it's overcast, they may be more on the bottom. When it's sunny, a lot of times they suspend. And that's, that, like I said, the second day after the front, when it gets sunny out there, if you're pulling a jig or something, sure, you might drop it right in front of them. But once it gets to the bottom, they're probably not even looking at it. So a lot of times they don't leave the cove. If this is the dock pole or a piece of standing timber, they just go from being next to it on the bottom to being next to it up high on it. So that's the only thing that changes. Again, those are micro adjustments, not macro. So they still stay in that same place. They just relate to the cover a little bit differently. And then looking at this a little bit bigger picture, they also, when it's prefrontal and it's more overcast and you have more wind and stuff, they tend to roam more just generally. They spread out, and instead of being in small little groups, you can just go down a bank and get the wind at your back and start drifting. If you're bank fishing, just walking along the bank, or maybe in a boat, I'm just hauling butt down the shoreline, just casting. You just pick one up here and there. They're kind of spread out. After the front, a lot of times that water temperature drops, and if they're going to get tighter to cover, well, then all of a sudden they're not randomly placed. So if there's 25 fish that say live in the back of a small creek or something like that, they're all over the place. You can randomly catch them. After the front, there may be 1 or 2 spots where all 25 of those are at. So that a lot of times that'll drive them to the closest deep water. Now, if the back of the creek is all about 2 to 3 feet, that doesn't mean 80 feet of water. That means to them a little creek channel or a little drop off or something might be 4 feet. It might be 8 feet, something like that, but it's all relative. It's just a little bit deeper. And typically they're going to move back to either the thickest cover that's nearby or the closest drop. So basically what you're looking for then is something that's, 100 feet, 100 yards away. Where's a really thick cover? Is there a brush pile? Is there a boat dock, something like that? Is there thick grass they can get in? Or is it that depth change? That's a creek channel or a drop off, a little bluff, a channel swing bank where it's steeper on the shore, something like that. Those 25 fish, remember, in that shallow creek, all of a sudden, instead of being all spread over, they may be in 1 or 2 spots. So the takeaways for fix number 1, those small adjustments: fish closer to cover, look for the closest drop off or the closest thick cover that's nearby. Put your bait closer into that cover, and you're going to primarily focus on areas. Once you get a bite, you really need to work there because they're probably grouped up. Now, fix number 2 is refine the food. And let's think about wolves for a second. Do wolves have a favorite temperature? I'm sure if you asked them, they'd probably tell you, yeah, 58 is my favorite temperature. I just love it. I feel really relaxed. But where does the wolf go? If it's the summertime and the elk are way high up near the snow, way high in the mountains, the wolf's going to go with the food. And then in the wintertime, it may be all snowy up on the top of the mountains, but the elk are way down in the valleys. Do the wolves, are they looking for the right temperature? No, they don't care about the temperature. They're going where their food source is. Bass are kind of the same way. And the baitfish are going to move quite a bit, though, and that's going to be really driven by the bottom of the food chain, the plankton and stuff at the bottom of the food chain. If you get a really cold snap, that's going to stop a lot of those processes. And the other thing is it's going to change the nutrients and stuff in the water, and it'll drive the baitfish in or out. That is what we see on live scope. Guys have really found it where you just got ghosted by fish before and you were just catching them randomly in an area, or it really seemed good in the back of a creek or something, and all of a sudden it just changed and you didn't know where to go. Now you can kind of see that on live scope or on your traditional sonar if you're just idling in and out of a creek. And you can also see this if you're pond fishing or fishing off the bank. There may be one day when you're catching them, a lot of times there's just a lot of activity, a lot of blue herons and cranes and stuff on the shoreline. You see all those fish-eating birds, the gulls and stuff are around. And the next day when you're not catching them, if you're not seeing any of those, the loons and seagulls, all that stuff, but you see them a quarter of a mile, a half mile, way up the lake, something like that, that's because the baitfish moved. We can see that now in live scope, but you can, like I said, just see it with your eyes. And a lot of times what happens after the cold front is they just move off the shore out to the middle of a creek, or they move from the back of the creek farther out to the main lake, or they move out in the middle of the main lake or a different section of it. What also happens with these fronts is a lot of times, like I said before, a lot of precipitation, a lot of rain, you'll get water washing in. Now, sometimes those nutrients, if it's not too crazy cold or too crazy muddy, it washes fresh nutrients and things in. The shad and the baitfish, instead of going out to the deeper water, will swim to the backs of the creeks. So little creeks where the inflows, where water's rushing in, or in the very back, sometimes they'll go way back there. So that'll totally change the location. I've actually seen this. I saw one on Lake Fork one year. It was getting colder and colder. We had a lot of cold fronts. We had snow in Texas, which is kind of rare. And I was catching fish really good on Main Lake points. And we had some grass then, and I was throwing a lipless crankbait and throwing jigs on points. And the water went from the low 40s up to about 38 or so. And it got really good. They kept on moving farther out. The baitfish was moving out, and I was catching around this grass on the Main Lake points. Really predictable. We got a cold rain, and all of a sudden, I couldn't get bit. And I mean, it was miserable out there. We're not getting bit. And I kind of fished around a point, and instead of stopping on the point, I just fished in a little farther and got a bite. And we ended up, I thought, what the heck? We went to the back. The back of the creek, the water was barely above freezing. Some of the snow was melting off. It just cold rain, and the water temps was like 35 down to like 33. I mean, it was almost freezing cold in the back. A little bit of color to it. And guess what? I was catching them on lipless crankbaits then, all the way in the back of the creek, and they were biting pretty good. And I'm not talking about dead sticking them either. We were reeling, the water's like this deep to this deep. You had to reel your bait pretty fast all the way in the back. So sometimes when that water goes up and the new nutrients wash in, the bait fish are going to follow it. And again, like the wolves, the bass don't have a favorite temperature. They like to eat. So wherever the food's going, they're going. So refine the food and you'll find the fish. Now on fix number 3, let's talk about bait some. And fix number 3 is slow down and speed up. The conventional wisdom is downsize everything, go to a tiny little bait, use the light line, and just let it sit there low and slow, work it as slow as possible. And that does work sometimes. Remember, we talked about those resident fish. A lot of times they're going to be right in cover. But you don't even have to necessarily downsize a lot of times unless it really gets bright and sunny and really clear water. Sure, sometimes you have to do that. So lighter line, smaller baits might help. But the bigger key to me is actually getting that bait right in the heart of cover. Remember, they sit closer to cover a lot of times. So get it right in front of them and make more precise casts. So that means getting into the heart of the laydown, skip it farther underneath a boat dock, get it into that heavy cover. And then sure, a lot of times when those fish aren't very aggressive, they're not moving very far, that's when dead sticking, which is just throwing a bait in there and letting it sit, which is the hardest thing to do in all of fishing. I mean, I'll just take my reeling hand, I'll tuck it underneath my arm and hold it there, count to like 10 or 15 Mississippi. I can't tell you how many times with jigs and Senkos, baits like that, you throw your drop shot up there, whatever, just let it sit there. And those fish, when it's really cold after a cold front, they're not moving much. I don't know, especially if it's around the spawn too, where those fish kind of like they were really snapping and aggressively protecting beds before. You can't quite see them, but they're kind of bedding later in the spring. Man, dead sticking it works really good. So you don't necessarily have to downsize your bait, but working it really slowly, that's going to work a lot of times. And just keep it in front of them as slow as you can possibly fish it, but as tight to the cover is really the key. Now, the flip side of that, though, a lot of times in that really clear water, those fish, they're just getting too good of a look at it. They're already in kind of a bad mood after the front. The water temps drop, the bait's not moving as much, they're not chasing as far, and then it's sunny and slick. So in that clear water, a lot of times, that's when they get maximum visibility. They can see all the flaws in your bait. So if you put it there in front of them for a long time and let it just sit, they're going to see all the warts and all the flaws in your bait. They're going to see everything that's wrong. This little hook thing, this pointy thing sticking out. No bait fish have that. That's where speeding up works a lot of times. And you'll see pros do this a lot. If they were throwing, say, a Texas rig before with a 1/4 ounce sinker or something with a really slow fall and getting bit on that before, all of a sudden when it gets post-frontal, you get the cold front going up, working a bait quicker, so maybe using up to like a 1/2 ounce sinker. Instead of that bait just slowly falling, you pitch it in there, it just zooms past them. Same with bladed jigs and crankbaits and stuff, working a stop and go with erratic. They always talk about this as triggering strikes or getting reaction strikes, where all of a sudden that bait, it's in tight cover there, and that bait just comes to them up quickly and is right in their face. It's that fight or flight instinct right there. They have a split second. They can either decide to eat it or run away from it, but they only have a split second. So you force them to react. That's where that quick drop or working a bait quickly, but into the cover again. You can't they're not going to come out of the cover. If this is the boat dock, I can't pitch 10 feet off to the side and expect that fish is going to get it like he might have a couple days ago. But when the front comes, if I put it right close to it and I drop it right on him, it either drops quickly to the bottom, or it comes past them quickly where I just drop it and put it right by them, you force that reaction. So speeding up a lot of times is important. And again, that's going to take erratic action. So that means something like your bladed jigs, if you reel it and give it a little burst or rod flick, that's going to make it kind of zigzag and kick out. Crankbaits, you hear about crankbaits that hunt, that basically go off center, that just wobble along and all of a sudden kick out. Anything that flares, if you're working a jig or a swim jig, something like that, that's more rod tip where you can flick it every once in a while, you can drag it and all of a sudden give it kind of a quick pop. And one last thing before we get to the bonus tip of what really is what I look for after the fronts, but the last thing you can do is make repeated casts. I don't know if you've ever talked to anybody who throws spinnerbaits a lot, buzzbaits, stuff like that. If they throw at stuff just repeated casts, it will amaze you. A stump or a lay down in like 2 feet of water, you can throw to it just time after time. And your boat, as you're kind of working past it, you're throwing in front of you, then to the side, then you're going past, keep going by. And it'll be that 5th, 10th, 15th cast, all of a sudden one bites it. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it's the right angle or the fish is kind of just not willing to move, but you finally put it right across his nose, or it's just close enough to him, or the action is just right. But making repeated casts to those key areas, remember I said they make micro adjustments, they'll get right in those key spots. You cast time and time again, that's when those repeated casts a lot of times after the front really pay off. And then finally, here's my bonus tip, and I think this is the most important one. This what really puts the odds in your favor. And the bonus tip is fish muddy water or shade. Now remember, what we talked about is after the front, it gets sunny and slick. Typically, if you ask anybody, sunny and slick, are those good conditions for fishing clear water? Usually not, unless you're sight fishing for bass, or you have like deep water, maybe something like that, or you're scoping. But typical shallow water fishing, that's a death sentence. That's just bad conditions, except for two little caveats there. The first being shade. Those fish, they're going to roam less, but it's going to pin them really tight in the shade. So if you have a shady bank or you have boat docks, those fish, they're going to use bass like the shade too as their advantage to conceal themselves, to hide. It's their camo, so they can lurk around and catch bait fish. So if you had boat docks before and this is the boat dock and there's fish just all around kind of floating around, sure, you can catch them here and there, but you can't really call your shot of I'm going to cast here and catch them. But if it's a really bright sunny day, the odds are after this front where I'm going to catch that bass, if here's the boat dock, it's going to be the hardest to get, darkest spot in the middle there. Sure, that takes kind of a tougher cast, but the good news is most people can't even put it there, so that fish probably hasn't seen but 1 or 2 lures all day, if any. And if you can put it back there, you can kind of call your shot. You say, if there's a fish in here, I know where he's going to be at. So you skip your general under there, you skip your jig underneath there or something. You know where he's going to be at. So if you fish shade, that puts him in predictable locations. And that's what I like to fish in clear water. I find the darkest shade I can find, because in the clear water, that's going to be your best bite. Now in muddy water, this is what I like the most. And let's clarify. Cold muddy water, people say, well, you can't catch fish in it. We get cold muddy water down here in Texas and these Oklahoma lakes and stuff a lot. And I'm here, if they didn't eat when it was cold and muddy, well, I've got a news flash, they won't eat like half the year. So yeah, they do. What they don't like is fresh mud. So when it's really gritty, if it looks like somebody just took a jar of sand and poured it in there and there's all that little grit, that's nasty. If something's normally clear water and then it turns that grit, that's bad. But if something's normally muddy, it's been muddy for the last 3 months, it's just kind of browner water, or something is normally clear, but it just got a little bit of color, there's not that grit, a day or two once the kind of grit settles out, those fish, they can't see the flaws in your bait as good. And the days that they bite, those overclass days, they're not seeing bait as your bait or any fish as well. They're not seeing as well either. Those bright sunny days are when they're seeing the best. That's their best feeding opportunity. And remember, the sun usually puts them tight to cover. So in muddy water, that makes it that's why I really love to do this, because I can call my shots. If there's a laydown or something, that fish is going to be really tight to it. And those bright, sunny, slick days, that's the days when they're going to bite well. So I'll slow roll a spinnerbait down the side of it, or I'll flip those laydowns. I'll get in that sun and those muddy water fish. I don't care if the water temp is reading 38 or 61 or anywhere in between. When it's pre-spawn through the spawn like that, those fish are going to be glued to those things. So I know when I'm target fishing, I'm putting it in front of fish. I'm not going to waste much time in between laydowns, in between docks or stumps or anything that's there. I'm only going to throw to those targets. But if I go into a back of a creek or down a bank and there's 8 laydowns down there, I'm going to pick those apart pretty good. And I know when it's sunny and slick, that post frontal, those fish are probably glued right to it. If they're not biting my bait, well, I'm probably going to change up my retrieve a little bit, slow it down or something, or I may change to a different bait instead of going with the spinner bait that's rolling over the top, go with a jig or something that's going into the heart of it. But I know those fish are going to be there. They're not all roaming around. They're not out in the middle of that muddy water. They're going to be next to those targets. So in that case, muddy water, that post frontal, some of your best days. That's what I do on the tough days after the cold fronts. Other pros, they do some different things. Check out my podcast, interviews with top pros, how they pick apart lakes and catch them on those tough days.